Hi and welcome to the Bible channel. This is part 2 in our series of Bible prophecies that will affect. And in this episode, we're going to be looking at the prophecies that will affect Israel. If Bible prophecy is something that interests you or amazes you, then you will find this video very encouraging. Please leave us comments, like, share and subscribe. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments section and we'll do our best to get back to you.
Well, there's no doubt, is there, that Israel is different from any other country in the world. For a country with a population of, as of last Monday when I checked, 9,473,790 people, so slightly less than 9.5 million, it's disproportionately represented, and it's, so far as the world is concerned, it's continuously in the world's media. It's getting attention. By comparison, of course, Australia is roughly 26 million people, 2.5 times the size of the nation of Israel, and doesn't get anywhere near the same amount of world attention. And there's plenty of opinions in and around Israel. There's those who think Israel's special. A quick search will show that. And there are some pretty amazing things. This country of less than 10 million people, if you have a look here, it has 0.2% of the world's population and, for example, represents 23% of Nobel winners. They're playing much above its weight there, isn't it? And there's a whole lot of other bits and pieces there. Militarily, it's also quite remarkable. According to this particular website, the Global Firepower website, where it lists all the countries of the world, Israel, it ranks at 15 out of 145. And that takes into account not only its hardware and whatever, but also the alliances and things like that that it has. Fascinating, isn't it? For interest's sake, Australia ranked 18 in that same list. But for all the things that people see that makes Israel special, of course, there's a whole lot of people that are looking at Israel from the completely opposite perspective. And here's the cover of Time magazine in February last year. And there's a fascinating article. And of course, as we know, even in Australia, the rise of anti-Semitism, as it's been seen in most capital cities, and in particular Sydney and Melbourne, is reaching proportions that has caused the Australian government to have to respond, putting in place new legislation and new powers to the police to be able to deal with it. And there's this fascinating article which talks about an alarming rise in anti-Semitism. And it says things here, no one can say definitely why the pre-Gaza war surge happened when it did. Groups like the neo-Nazis who marched in Charlottesville in 2017 probably played a role, as did the influence of figures like the troubled rapper turned designer Kanye West. I think I got that right. I had to check the pronunciation before. It's remarkable talking about this rise of anti-Semitism. And what it's referring to is this particular event. So in 2022, Kanye West tweeted about going DEFCON 3 on Jewish people, which is a strange expression anyway, because those that know, it's actually DEFCON, which is a defence rating piece. There's no such thing as DEFCON, but presumably you can be a successful rapper without necessarily understanding geopolitical meanings. But he pulls this out, and then look how people respond to it, fighting against the Jewish people. And we might look at those things and say, yes, but of course, the reason that is happening is because of the Jewish establishment of the nation of Israel, relatively recent times, 1948. And the Gaza problem, the West Bank and the Palestinians. But that's not the case, is it? One doesn't have to go too far back to see that anti-Semitism, antagonism towards the Jewish people has been the case for all periods of time. And here's some posters that are the early 1900s And you can see just from the pictures of it, the first one is a documentary by the Nazis. This one here is a Serbian notice. You don't know yet, beware, it says. Well, maybe that's just them, but no, it keeps going on. This is a French one. The awakening of the people, the real enemies of France, it says here. And then this is a Czech, I don't know what you call it, group of statuettes, which are supposedly depicting Jewish people. And we're not even talking about the anti-Jewish propaganda and push of the Arab nations around that. You know, Israel is a country that creates extreme views, doesn't it? Extreme views. You either love it or you hate it. There's something strange about that. It's unique for nations, isn't it? It's unique. Very few nations build that much emotion to them. You know, if you said to someone, for example, how do you feel about Barbados or Botswana or Cyprus or Ghana or Timor-Leste, for example? Most people would have no opinion at all. Unless you've got relatives that live there, or perhaps you've lived there yourself, you just wouldn't have an opinion, would you? But everyone has an opinion about the Jews. And that makes them different, unique. And our interest in the Jews is because we're Bible students, and it is impossible to read any of the Bible without coming to the inevitable conclusion that the Jews and the land of Israel feature prominently in God's interaction with mankind. They're inextricably linked to God's revealed purpose. And our purpose for tonight is to weave some of that together, to see what the Bible says about this divisive nation, this nation of contrasting emotions, this nation that disproportionately features in the awareness of the world. And what we're going to see is that Israel is miraculous. Miraculous. Perhaps turn up as the first quote that we're going to have a look at. Turn up Isaiah 43. It's back a few pages from Ezekiel. And God's going to make a statement that is staggering. Isaiah 43. Pick it up first in verse 1. But now thus saith the Lord that created thee, O Jacob. Who's he talking about? He that formed thee, O Israel. So he's talking about Israel, isn't he? So God is going to say something. Fear not, he says, I have redeemed thee. I have called thee by thy name. Thou art mine. If you were listening intently to Aaron's prayer when he began, you would have heard him make reference to the fact that Israel is God's people. Well, here it is. God says it himself. He's redeemed them. Have a look in, continue on verse 5. Fear not, I am with thee. I will bring thy seed from the east. I'll gather thee from the west. I'll say to the north, give up. To the south, keep not back. Bring my sons from far and my daughters from the ends of the earth. I mean, this is God speaking here, and he's saying, they're my sons and daughters. I want them back. Verse 10. Ye are my witnesses, saith the Lord, and my servant whom I have chosen, that ye may know and believe me and understand that I am he. Before me there was no God formed, neither shall there be after me. I, even I, am the Lord, and beside me there is no Saviour. What a remarkable thing that is. What a remarkable thing that is. He's the God of the universe. And he's singling out this people, Israel. So I've made you for myself, my sons and daughters. You're my witnesses. That's staggering. God's chosen that nation to be a witness for him. And so people can look at that nation and say, wow, there must be a God. Turn over a page or two to Isaiah 45. You know, the saving of Israel is linked to God's purpose. And I don't want to steal the thunder because tonight's actually number 2 in a series of 3. And Aaron will be doing the third of the 3 talks, and he'll be looking at prophecies that relate to us. So we're looking at Israel tonight. But here's the sneak preview, the little taster, that you can see that the saving of Israel becomes part of God's purpose with the whole of the earth. Have a look at verse 17 of Isaiah 45. But Israel shall be saved, so we're talking about Israel again. Israel shall be saved in the Lord with an everlasting salvation. Ye shall not be ashamed nor confounded, world without end. So God has a plan that's going to involve the saving of Israel. For thus saith the Lord that created the heavens, God himself that formed the earth and made it. I mean, that's the credentials, isn't it? That's the credentials. This isn't someone else speaking here. It's not like, hang on, who's talking again? Are we dealing with the real God here? We're absolutely. The one that created the heavens. He's giving his credentials here. God himself that formed the earth. He established it. He created it not in vain. He formed it to be inhabited. I am the Lord and there is none else. So verse 17, the saving of the Jews becomes linked with God's purpose with the whole earth. He's created this earth for a purpose. And somehow the saving of Israel becomes linked with God's purpose with the whole earth. So the whole earth, of which we're part of it, of course, the whole earth's salvation becomes inextricably linked with Israel. Oh, maybe that's just an Old Testament concept, you might be thinking. Maybe it's just, Israel is important in the Old Testament. When the New Testament comes along, then maybe those things go away. Well, they don't, do they? They don't. Romans chapter 9 on the screen there, written by the Apostle Paul. And he talks about his brethren. Now, Paul was a Jew, so when he's talking about his kinsmen, he's talking about the Jews. My brethren, my kinsmen, according to the flesh, the Jews, who are Israelites, to whom pertaineth the adoption and the glory and the covenants and the giving of the law and the service of God and the promises, whose are the fathers, and of whom, as concerning the flesh, Christ came, who is over all, God blessed forever. He says. So the Old Testament makes it clear that Israel and the saving of Israel is inextricably linked to God's purpose with the whole earth. But the New Testament says the same thing, doesn't it? They're still linked. Or maybe that's just Paul. Maybe he just had a natural inclination towards the Jews. Well, John 4 is the words of Jesus himself. It puts it beyond all doubt, doesn't it? Like we might be challenging Paul, or we might be challenging the prophets in the Old Testament. Maybe we could accuse them of bias, but when it comes to authority, there's no doubt that Jesus Christ has the ultimate authority. And what's his perspective? Salvation, he says, salvation is of the Jews. He doesn't say it was. He's not putting in the past tense, is it? It's not like, well, once upon a time, but now. No. Salvation is of the Jews. So it's obvious, isn't it, when we look at these quotes, that the nation of Israel doesn't just date back 77 years to 1948. Does it? The nation of Israel has got a history, and it's got an ancestry and a story that dates way back beyond the last 77 years of modern history. In fact, the nation of Israel has been really, in its earliest form, in existence from the time of Abraham, BC 2100 or thereabouts. And it formally became a nation in around about BC 1600. And it began with Abraham because there was a promise given to Abraham in Genesis chapter 12, where Abraham was told to respond to God in faith And if he did, then God would make of him a great nation. God says, leave where you live. Leave where you live, which happened to be in Ur of the Chaldees, and go somewhere where I'm going to take you. And Abraham went. He didn't know where he was going. He just went in faith. God said, go, he went. And he became a stranger and a pilgrim that walked in a place that God told him to go. Originally, following up the Euphrates to Haran, and then down into the land. And God said, if you do that, I'll make of you a great nation. A great nation. And again, I don't want to steal Aaron's things, but just as a taster, it's not just, remember we said before, Isaiah 45, it's not just God working with the Jews in some sort of separate and exclusive sense. God's work with the Jews becomes inextricably linked to the world. And you even see this right back in Genesis chapter 12, isn't it? It's part of this promise that God says is, in thee shall all nations of the earth be blessed, not just Jews, not just people in Israel, all nations of the earth. But I won't say anything more about that tonight. When Abraham got down into this region of Canaan here, in Genesis 12 verse 7, God said, unto thy seed will I give this land. And the land that Abram was in at the time, later his name was changed to Abraham, was the land that we know today to be Israel. So what was the formation, the structure of the beginning of the Jews, the Israelites? Well, there's a little bit of a family tree. So we just saw before, Genesis 12, the promises were made to Abraham. Abraham had a number of wives. Interestingly enough, one of them was Hagar, through whom he had a son called Ishmael, who became the father of the Arabs. So many of the Arab nations will claim Abraham as their father, and they do so correctly because he was their father through Hagar. But the promise that God made was through Sarah, his wife Sarah. And they had a son, a miraculous birth of Isaac. Isaac's wife was Rebekah, who had two sons, Jacob and Esau. And Jacob's name, and this becomes the key thing here to where does Israel come from? Jacob's name was changed to Israel. In Genesis 32 verse 28, thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel, says God to Jacob. You're going to be called Israel. Your name will be changed from Jacob to Israel. Jacob means a supplanter, someone that's trying to get ahead. Israel means a prince with God. So the children of Israel are the children of Jacob. You can sort of see how that works, don't you? If Jacob's name's changed to Israel, he's now Israel. So the children of Israel are the descendants of Israel, who's actually Jacob, because his name was changed from Jacob to Israel. And he had 12 sons, and so we have the 12 tribes of Israel. And the nation of Israel, who traces their genealogy back through, in particular, most of them at this stage, through two of those tribes, can trace it back through Jacob, or Israel as his name was, Isaac, and back to Abraham. So that's a little bit of where the name Israel comes from. It is the name that Jacob's name was changed to by God, and his descendants therefore become the children of Israel. So Genesis 12, God made it clear that he would have, based on his faith, based on his willingness to go and respond to the request that God made to him to go into a land that God would show him, that God would do special things with his descendants. He'd make of him a great nation. And Israel becomes, throughout the Old Testament, they become God's special people. And Exodus 19 picks that up. So Exodus 19 really now starts to talk about, in around that 1600 BC period of time, their formation from a group of people, family groups, into a formal nation. A formal nation. And part of that formality was a law, a religious law, and also a law that governed what they did. Governed matters of hygiene, governed matters of law, justice, punishment, how they would live in the land, laws that relate to neighbours, all of the things that we see to greater or lesser extents in our own systems of governance that countries have, countries such as Australia. And part of that, God made this point to the nation of Israel. He says, if you will obey my voice indeed and keep my covenant, then you will be a peculiar treasure. Now, that's a strange word, isn't it? Peculiar treasure. We think of peculiar as unusual, a little weird perhaps. That's not what it means. It means special. It means unique, precious. You're going to be a particular treasure above all people. For all the earth is mine, God says. So here he's the creator of all things. He can have what he wants. And he says, if you respond to me, if you're going to obey my voice, then you're going to be extra special to me. You'll be a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. And God's going to use Israel as a demonstration. What did he say again? Isaiah 43. You're my witnesses. So he's going to use Israel as his witnesses, as a demonstration of how God works with people. And other people can look at how God works with Israel and say, now I understand. I can see what God's trying to achieve in them, and I want to be part of that as well. But God makes it clear that they needed to do what he said. And Psalm 106 points out the fact that largely they did not. Psalm 106, reflecting again on the history of Israel, says, they did not destroy the nations concerning whom the Lord commanded them. They were mingled among the heathen. So this separateness, this holy nation that they were called to be, this peculiar treasure, this representative group of people that could show everybody what it meant for God to be working with people, these witnesses that God had in mind, well, they're mingled now amongst everyone else. They've learned their works of everyone else. They've served the idols of everyone else, which were a snare to them. And what we want to look at now is our subject, which talks about prophecy. So hopefully that's a useful sort of background piece that shows why we're talking about Israel particularly, why Israel features so much in the Bible, both Old Testament and New Testament. But we want to look specifically at 3 prophecies tonight. And we're just going to touch on them, or sort of just skim over the top of them, but 3 prophecies that specifically talk about God working with Israel, and ones that we can see have either been fulfilled or partly fulfilled, demonstrating the amazing work of God with this people of Israel. And then, God willing, as I said, we'll see next week the flow on and impact to us. So the first of those prophecies is Deuteronomy. I'd like you to turn up Deuteronomy 28. So again, this is relatively early in the establishment of the nation of Israel, around 1600-ish BC. So they've moved on from being family groups and they're now being formed into a nation. You may be familiar with Moses. Moses was that leader. He took them out of Egypt through God's power, of course, and established them as a nation. And at the end of Moses' life, after 40 years in the wilderness, he puts before, in Deuteronomy chapter 28, he puts before the children of Israel, the Israelites, the nation of Israel, he puts before them the prospect before them. And the prospect has got 2 parts to it. 2 parts, 2 options. It's like a fork in the road, and there's only 2 options. There's either actions that will result in blessing, Deuteronomy 28, verses 1 to 14, or actions that will result in cursing, Deuteronomy 28, verse 15, all the way through to 68. Interesting, isn't it? There's the choices, blessing, cursing. I mean, you only have to look at how many verses are sort of set aside for the blessing and how many verses are set aside for the cursing to see that God knew what the people would be like. I mean, God knows what we're all like. It's not just a reflection on the people of Israel at this point in time, it's a reflection on mankind, isn't it? We're called to godliness, we naturally tend to revert back to the things that we want to do ourselves. But I want to pick up the beginning of the section on cursing. So, and you can easily see it. If you read through the whole section of Deuteronomy 28, you can see this blessing, blessed, blessing, etc., all the way through till you get back down to verse 14 of Deuteronomy 28. Verse 15 is the change. It's the switch. But it shall come to pass. It shall come to pass. If thou wilt not hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God to observe to do all his commandments and his statutes, which I command thee this day, that all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee. And then he goes on to say, cursed shalt thou be in the city, cursed in the field, cursed, etc., basket in the store, and so on. So you can see it's the switch, isn't it? Verse 15 is the switch. If you don't do what God says, then instead of the blessings will come cursings. And these cursings are quite specific. It goes through what would happen to their crops and to their herds and all of that. But turn over the page to verse 36. And when you read Deuteronomy 28, you can see that there's distinct, we might call them sort of general type of cursings. Things will go wrong, your flocks won't bring forth little sheep, and your food won't go, and all this kind of stuff. But then there's specific elements as well. And verse 36 is one of those specific things. Have a look at verse 36. The Lord shall bring thee and thy king, which thou shalt set over thee, unto a nation which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, and there shalt thou serve other gods, wood and stone. That's interesting, isn't it? That's interesting. It's quite specific. It's not just a general cursing. It's not like, well, things won't go too flash where you are. No, you're actually going to be taken into captivity. You and the king which you've got over you are going to be taken to a nation that you haven't known before. This is a transportation away from the place where you are. So much so that you're going to end up establishing yourself and setting yourselves up in that place. And that is exactly what happened to the nation of Israel. Exactly what happened. Well, the Bible even records it. Just like the Deuteronomy 28 says, they did set up a king. There were a succession of kings that worked their way through it, some good, some bad, some brought the people back to God, some led them away, and they reached the point of time in around about BC 600 where they were taken away by the Babylonians. And we can read about that. We can read about that in the records, the historical records of the Bible. We can read about that in archaeological elements that have been found. You can see the amazing way that these words spoken by Moses, right back at the beginning of the establishment of the nation, came to pass. Staggering accuracy. But if we kept reading on Deuteronomy chapter 28, we'd find that there's various activities. So that happens in verse 36 and verse 37. They become a proverb and a byword. And then it's back to them dwelling back in the land again. Thou shalt plant vineyards, dress them, won't eat of the wine, the drink of the wine, gather the grapes. So they're back in the land. You can sort of see that. And it goes back on to talking through some of the challenges that would happen. And then we get to verse 49 and we see there's another invasion, specific. The Lord shall bring a nation against thee from far. So verse 36 spoke about one captivity, then they're back in the land again after that captivity. Verse 49 and 50 speak about a second captivity. These people are coming from far, further, from the end of the earth, as swift as the eagle flieth, a nation whose tongue thou shalt not understand, a nation of fierce countenance, and not regard the person of the old, nor show favour to the young. So here you've got in this same prophecy, right back in Deuteronomy 25, these two specific captivities that Israel called to, and we know that happened as well. This nation from afar, whose tongue they didn't understand. Speaking Latin, of course. It's the Romans who came in AD 70 and ended up taking away, sweeping away, destroying the temple and taking Israel and scattering them into every place. And that whole section, which we won't go through, but we're to read The subsequent verse in Deuteronomy 28 shows some of the incredible privations and the challenges that came upon the nation of Israel at this time. People eating their children. Of course, as many of you will know, you can go to historical accounts written by the time, perhaps one of the most well-known being Josephus. He was writing at the time, who recorded events that aligned with remarkable accuracy to the prophecies of Deuteronomy 28. Staggering, isn't it? But in some ways, it's interesting as it is, they're a long time ago. Even AD 70 is rapidly approaching 2,000 years ago. What other prophecies are there? Well, let's have a think about and look at our second of the prophecies we want to look at. And that's our reading for tonight in Ezekiel 37. Ezekiel 37 starts bringing the prophecies a little bit more into our own region of time, isn't it? Our own consciousness, our own period where we can look back and verify from either people that were alive at the time or at least only one generation ago, events that suddenly occurred. Because Ezekiel 37, even with the most simple reading, is a remarkably clear prophecy to interpret. Aaron read it for us. He read the first 14 verses just from a timing perspective, but it's a powerful picture, isn't it? It's a vision that Ezekiel's taken into, but it's a vision that has a prophetic meaning to it. And he sees in this vision, this valley that's full of dry bones. They're not just dry, they're very dry. You see that? Very dry bones. And we don't have to guess what this is about. There's this picture as it happens. God challenges Ezekiel, could they live? Ezekiel's like, well, you know, God. From a human perspective, the answer's clear, definitely not, but Ezekiel doesn't limit God. And these dry bones, when Ezekiel prophesies in the name of God on these bones, they come together. They were scattered around, they come together and they sort of form man shapes, don't they? Skeletons that you can recognise. And then he sees the flesh going on to, it must have been a pretty intense vision. I don't know, imagine seeing that, this flesh and sinews going on, and suddenly he sees all these bodies, but they're still dead bodies. It went from very dry bones into skeletons, into bodies lying on the ground, and then ultimately he's told to prophesy again, and as he prophesies, suddenly the Spirit of God comes upon them and they stand upon their feet, and they're an amazing army of living soldiers. Can you picture the scene? Probably had nightmares for a fair while after thinking about that, I reckon. But we don't have to guess what it's about. We don't have to guess. It's really clear. The answer of the prophecy is given in Ezekiel 37. Verse 11. Then he said unto me, Son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel. Behold, they say, our bones are dried, our hope is lost, we're cut off for our parts. See, the valley full of dry bones is Israel. They've got no hope. They're very dry. They're just a jumble of bones. Therefore prophesy and say unto them, Thus saith the Lord God, Behold, O my people, I will open your graves, cause you to come up out of your graves, bring you into the land of Israel, and ye shall know that I am the Lord. Well, that's what Isaiah 45 said. Sorry, Isaiah 43, wasn't it? That was Isaiah 43. God working with Israel. Israel as his witness. Ye shall know that I am the Lord when I have opened your graves, O my people, brought you up out of my graves, and shall put my spirit in you, and ye shall live. And I shall place you in your own land. Then shall ye know that I, the Lord, have spoken it and performed it, saith the Lord. Okay, fair enough. This might just be talking about the regathering of Israel after the time of the Babylonians. I mean, If you know anything about when Ezekiel prophesied, he prophesied at the time when Israel was taken into the Babylonians, taken away by the Babylonians. In fact, Ezekiel was with the captives that were in Babylon. So, presumably, he's just giving a prophecy about the return of Israel after the Babylonians. But he's not. He's not. See, this prophecy is quite specific. Although it was being given, this prophecy was being given, yes, at the time when Israel were taken into that first major captivity, when they went over to the Babylonians, this isn't referring to their regathering after the Babylonians. This is pointing far, far further forward. How do we know that? We know that because the specific elements in there. See, these were very dry bones. Makes that point, doesn't it? It mentions some dry bones quite a few times, but look at the end of verse 2. Lo, they were very dry. The point that it's making is that this body of Israel had been dead for a very long time. Well, when Israel went into Babylon, into captivity in about BC 600-ish, that captivity only lasted for 70 years. 70 years later, they were back in Israel, just like Deuteronomy 28 said. 70 years later, they're back. Jeremiah, who prophesied before and leading up to the Babylonian captivity, specifically prophesied and said it would be a 70-year captivity. We know that's the case. Daniel, who was in Babylon, was able to read Jeremiah's prophecy and determine that it would be a 70-year prophecy. See, so the Babylonian captivity could never have been used to describe very dry bones. The nation of Israel was always vaguely alive, you might say, using the sort of analogy of a body. They were vaguely alive during that period of time. There were still people in the land. Sure, they were sort of the poorest people of the land, but there were still people in the land when the bulk of the nation was in Babylon. The body was still alive, but not after the Romans. The Romans came through in AD 70 and sacked the city, and they took everyone out, destroyed the temple, and scattered the Jews throughout the whole world. And that was in AD 70. And the Jews remained scattered without a homeland, without a national identity, with no obvious mechanism to retain their national collectiveness for almost 1900 years. What a remarkable thing that is. What a remarkable thing that is. And the other reason we know that Ezekiel 37 is specifically referring to the period of time after the Romans is because during the period of the Babylonians, it was only the southern part of the kingdom, only the two tribes primarily that consisted of Israel. But when we come to Ezekiel 37, we can see that God's plan and the regathering of Israel relates to all 12 tribes. These bones are the whole house of Israel, he says in verse 11. In verse 21 and 22, he says, I'm going to take the children of Israel from among the heathen, whither they be gone. That's not the case with Babylon, but it was the case with the Romans. We'll gather them on every side and bring them into their own land, and we'll make them one nation in the land upon the mountains of Israel. One king, king to them all. There'll be no more two nations. There won't be a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. They won't be divided into two kingdoms anymore at all, because God is saving the whole house of Israel. It's remarkable, isn't it? So we can see Ezekiel 37 being fulfilled in relatively modern history. The modern re-establishment of the nation of Israel is the first part of the fulfillment of this. There's still extra elements that need to be fulfilled, the whole of Israel needing to come together, but that undeniably and absolutely categorically, we can see a remarkable fulfillment of Ezekiel 37. If you lived before 1948, then you just simply would not have seen even the beginning of the fulfillment of this part of the prophecy. The third one we want to have a quick look at now is what's called the Olivet prophecy. So come across to Luke 21. And I'll do this relatively quickly, but it deals with the same period of time as Ezekiel 37. And God does this. It's masterful. He gives the same message through different mechanisms, covering off slightly different elements and themes and focuses, but he does the same message over and over again in the Bible. And of course, that allows us to build up a picture, to reinforce the faith of those people who are reading these prophecies as they come. So Luke 21 is called the Olivet prophecy. The reason it's called the Olivet prophecy is because it was given, Jesus spoke it, on the Mount of Olives, which is just to the east of Jerusalem. Now, if you were to read Luke chapter 21, you can sort of see that it stems from the fact that the disciples were looking in verse 5 at how the temple was adorned with these goodly stones and gifts. And Jesus challenges them, doesn't he? He says, you're looking at this great temple. He said, I'm going to tell you, verse 6, the days will come in the which there shall not be left one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. Now, imagine how they would take that. This is their beloved temple. They're admiring the beauty of it. Jesus says, there's a time coming, there's not even going to be one stone left on another. It's the opposite of what they would have expected. And so, verse 7, they asked him, saying, Master, when shall these things be? What sign will there be when these things come to pass? That's a reasonable question, isn't it? So he's given them cataclysmic news. Their response is, when's that going to happen? When and how will they know? And so Jesus, in verse 8 through to the beginning of 24, he outlines the events which would lead up to AD 70. Because we know, Jesus knew, that there was going to come a time when Jerusalem would be destroyed. And that's what happened. You know, Jesus was on the earth around, at this period of time, maybe AD 33-ish. AD 70, the temple's destroyed, exactly as he says. And from verse 8 through to the first part of verse 24, Jesus outlines the events that would lead up to AD 70. When Jerusalem would be destroyed by the Roman armies, the temple would be destroyed. And he even includes advice for people to avoid it, doesn't he? He says, if you're there, get out. Don't stay there. Verse 21, flee to the mountains. If you're in the midst of it, depart out. Because these are the days of vengeance, verse 22, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. See, this is all about prophecy. And you can see verse 24, first half of verse, they shall fall by the edge of the sword and shall be led away captive into all nations. That's exactly what Deuteronomy 28 said. That's exactly what the beginning of the basis of Ezekiel 37 says. Israel scattered into all the nations. Become dried bones. No hope. Remember, that's what Ezekiel 37 said, wasn't it? Our hope is lost. We're cut off for our parts. And be led away captive into all nations, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles. And for 1900 years, that's what happened. And then Jesus makes a change. There's an until, isn't there, at the end of verse 24. There's a trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. So that flow of information says that this would happen, but there's going to come a time when it would stop happening. There would be an until. And whatever these times of the Gentiles are would be finished. And then through to verse 26, Jesus gives this prophecy of Israel's miraculous restoration in exact fulfillment of the prophecies that went before. Exact fulfillment of Ezekiel 37. Israel would have control of Jerusalem. He describes the political global conditions that would be happening at this point in time. Verse 25, signs of the sun, the moon, the stars, symbols for the political rulership, religious rulership. Upon the earth, distress of nations with perplexity, sea and waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear. for looking on those things which are coming on the earth. For the powers of heaven shall be shaken. And then verse 27, 28, he gives a prophecy of the return of Jesus as the King. And then verse 29 to 33, he describes a parable of a fig tree, a lesson for our day. And then at the end of the Olivet prophecy, he gives an exhortation to preparation. We could spend hours working our way through that. And I'm going to give you the 60-second overview of the remarkable events that led in this prophecy that Jesus gave in AD 33-ish. The remarkable events that led through to the times that we're in. Because AD 70 happened, just like Jesus said it would. Those who watched out and saw those events happening, just like he said they should, and got out of the city, just like he said they could. And Jerusalem was then trodden down of the Gentiles. And century after century passed. The bones got drier and drier. The hope got feebler and feebler. 1896, when the candle of hope was almost gone, it started to flicker again. And Ezekiel 37 started to come to pass. And the prophecy of Jesus in Luke chapter 22 began to come to pass. And as a result of an injustice seen and the recognition of the ongoing anti-Semitism against Israel. Why? Because they're God's people and God's continuing to retain their identity, continuing to make them stand out as special. We ended up with the beginning, the first Zionist Congress being held, the first moves for the restoration, this miracle, the restoration of Israel. And then, of course, through various events, which we look at and see as absolutely miraculous, God working, the angels working in the affairs of mankind, all of a sudden you've got the power of the day. Great Britain expressing their support for the establishment of the Jewish nation. Unheard of. Unheard of. And in the midst of a whole lot of challenge, as the importance of oil started to grow and various other bits and pieces which challenged those major countries. But there they were, expressing their thanks and their support for a homeland for the Jews. Here on this side, we've got General Allenby, who entered into Jerusalem. And of course, in the First World War, the Turks were gone. Their power gone. Britain came in. And then we have a period of time that the Bible describes as the time of the hunters. You know, God sent fishers to fish them, Israel, back to the land. And Jeremiah 16 says, I'll send many hunters and they shall hunt them. We're sort of getting into our time, aren't we? Sure, probably not too many of us in the hall here were alive to see these things, but they're pictures, photographs, real events, verifiable from history, and they're hunted back. Because if they didn't go back, they would be destroyed. And so we have the miracle of Israel. Against every odd, against every likelihood, a nation who'd been destroyed and kicked out of their land, scattered to the nations in AD 70. Dry bones. Can these bones live? They can't live. But they did. They did. In 1948, May the 14th, by virtue of the natural and historic right of the Jewish people and of the resolution of the General Assembly of the United Nations, we hereby proclaim the establishment of the Jewish state in Palestine to be called the State of Israel. And there's Ezekiel 37. There is the beginning of Luke 21 beginning to come to pass. But of course, if we read Luke 21 clearly and carefully, we would of course see that specifically Specifically, it's referring to Jerusalem, isn't it? Israel, verse 24, would fall by the edge of the sword to the Romans, AD 70. They'd be led away captive into all nations, and Jerusalem would be trodden down of the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled. But in actual fact, even after 1948, Jerusalem continued to be trodden down of the Gentiles. Jordanians were in Jerusalem until 1967. In the 6-Day War, Jerusalem again came into the hands of the Jews. It's staggering, isn't it? 1967. I know I was born in 1974, which is not that much after 1967. And in that context, let's think again about the words that Jesus said. So at this period of time, when Jerusalem is no longer in being trodden down of the Gentiles, end of verse 24, until the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled. So we'd have to say, well, that we can date that, can't we? We can put a date on that, which is quite remarkable. To be able to say that the Bible, you could sort of put a line there and say, well, there's 1967. Therefore, the things that are coming from that have to be post-1967. Well, does that fit? Is that what we see around us? There shall be signs in the sun and the moon and the stars, rulership, powers. Upon the earth, distress of nations, with perplexity. The word's got the idea of no way out. The sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear, for looking at things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken. And that is our time, isn't it? That is our time. What is our world like? Leadership in turmoil, distress of nations there's no way out, is there? It doesn't matter whether you're talking environmental, financial, the future prospects. The challenges of the world are insurmountable. Let's stop global warming and get rid of all energy. Who wants to do that? That don't work. It just can't be solved. No way out. And the common people, the sea and the waves, are roaring. Men's hearts failing them for fear because what is happening on the earth, because the powers are out of control. And then there's an amazing thing, isn't it? Because what does verse 27 say? And then, in that context, shall they see the Son of Man coming with power and great glory. So the appearance of the Son of Man, the Lord Jesus Christ, will be back to the earth to redeem those who are looking for a kingdom. Remarkable, remarkable. And then he gives this little parable, that behold the fig tree and all the trees. And we know that the fig tree represents the nation of Israel. When they shoot forth, there's our timer, isn't it? Because we can put a date against that too. When did the fig tree shoot forth? May the 14th, 1948. It blossomed, didn't it? But he doesn't just say the fig tree, does he? He says, and all the trees. Oh, what does he mean by that? The fig tree and all the trees. Well, if the fig tree represents the nation of Israel, it's reasonable to say all the trees represent other nations. So Israel shot forth, budded, as a nation in 1948. It's remarkable. Since this time, more nations have budded than any time before. You have a look at this little graph here. The blue is the number of democracies. Didn't have too many back in sort of pre-1850. The red is the number of non-democracies. So you can see how rapidly nations come. Now, we know that's the case. Of course it's the case, because a lot of the imperial powers that were before gave independence back to other nations, didn't they? England, or Great Britain, Germany, France. These imperialistic powers, which controlled most of the world, ended up allowing various countries, normally through revolution and fighting and whatever, but to gain their independence. And that's what the Bible said. There's trees shooting forth everywhere. Trees shooting forth everywhere. And when that happens, then we know that there's a time coming. when Jesus will return and save Israel. And Paul, again, as we bring our lecture to a close, he makes this point. He says, I would not, brethren, should be ignorant of this mystery. Don't be ignorant here. Blindness in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles come in. And then all Israel will be saved. As it is written, there shall come out of Zion the deliverer, shall turn away ungodliness from Jacob. For this, says God, is my covenant unto them, when I shall take away their sins. Sure, for the moment they're, as he says, they're enemies of the gospel for your sakes. They don't believe in Jesus largely. They haven't accepted him largely. But that's the opportunity we have to participate in the great hope of Israel, because it's touching the election, they're beloved for their father's sakes. And so we finish with this clear message, the words of Jesus himself, John 4:22. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews. And Paul himself would say, for the hope of Israel, I am bound with this chain. So God's work with Israel becomes the mechanism for our salvation. It's a remarkable thing that our salvation is dependent on believing the gospel based on God's promises to the fathers of Israel and preached by Jesus. And if you want to find out about that, you need to come along next week.
Don't forget to hit like, subscribe and share the video if you thought it was interesting. See you next time, God willing.